a person is Democrat or Republican, whether a person is right-wing or left-wing, we have to demand truth, and especially in our situation, truth about Israel. We can debate all the issues about Israel, 2 states and 1 state, settlements, no settlements, whatever it is, Likud, labor in the old days, we can all have that debate. But we have to demand that people tell the truth about Israel's story. And I can tell you that I've traveled around to college campuses around the world and to parliaments all around the world and made the case for Israel. And the constant situation I find myself in is just trying to correct outright falsehoods about Israel. So to then see, and I'll discuss a little bit about what I wrote in the article in a moment, to then see the falsehoods not just be in a college campus, which is bad enough, and not just amongst MPs somewhere, but actually impacting policies of a president of the United States, that's something where we all have to raise our voices against that. And I'll tell you a story that happened to me when I was in the Knesset. It was just a few weeks into my term, and Yuli Edelstein was the speaker of the Knesset. His office called my office and said that there are 20 members of the French Parliament in the building. They want me to go and meet with them. My first reaction was, you have the wrong guy. I have no background in foreign policy. I didn't have any background in diplomacy. Ask someone else. And they essentially said, you're one of a few members of Knesset who speaks English, go meet with them. So I go into this room completely unprepared. I had no briefing papers beforehand. And all I started doing was talking about the wonderful things that are happening in Israel. Technology, medical advances, Israel helping third world countries when there were natural disasters. I was no more than 5 minutes into this presentation, and a member of the French Parliament interrupted me in the middle of a sentence. He said, "Excuse me, sir, we don't want to hear about all of this. We are here to tell you to stop building settlements. Because Israel is building settlements, the Middle East is in flames. And because of Israel, radical Islam is spreading all around the world and has even reached France." That's a pretty heavy indictment for our little tiny country. And I asked them what I thought was a rhetorical question. I said, "Can one of you please tell me when the PLO was established?" PLO, which is the forerunner for the Palestinian Authority. And none of them can answer my question. I was in shock. I wanted to show them that the PLO was established in 1964, 3 years before the Six-Day War, 3 years before there were any settlements. If anyone thinks the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is about settlements, they have no chance of helping us resolve this. And they were in shock when I told them this, and they even checked on their phones, am I telling them the truth? And I realized that I have to go around the world just trying to tell the truth about Israel's story. And then to see that same falsehood in a memoir written by the president, a former president of the United States. Again, you can be a Democrat and you can have voted for Obama. You can be a Republican and be against Obama. It doesn't matter. We cannot accept that a president of the United States and an administration makes their policies based on an understanding that somehow the PLO rose as a result of the Six-Day War. Because then you might actually think,
Dov, can we applaud for you right now?
because I'm not used to hearing applause in the middle of a speech. That would be wonderful. One cannot possibly engage in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and try to help us deal with the complexities that are involved if you believe that the PLO arose as a result of Israel having control over the West Bank. You just can't begin to deal with this conflict. And I read this book, this chapter, and I'm just going to give you just a taste. If you haven't read the article yet, just a taste, and then I want to really broaden it to talk about the topic tonight, which is the incoming administration. To see a former president of the United States write that as a result of the British leaving Israel in 1948, the region fell into war. Fell into war? Is that what happened? Or is what happened that the Arab countries attacked the fledgling state of Israel to try to annihilate it? There's a big difference here. If you understand that there's the Arab countries that were fighting against Israel, or that somehow Israel was interested in engaging in war. Then he says the next 30 years after Israel was founded, here's the language: Israel engaged in conflicts with its Arab neighbors. Israel engaged in conflicts with that. Is there anybody who understands Israel who doesn't realize that we don't want to fight? All of us who are parents of soldiers, do we not want anything more than the guns to be put away and our children to be home and living peacefully with our Arab neighbors? But to write that we engaged in armed conflict with our Arab neighbors and not to write it as the truth, which is that the Arabs attacked us. The 6-Day War. To write about the 6-Day War without talking about the buildup to it, with the Arab countries ganging up against Israel and Israel having no choice but to defend itself. To write about the aftermath of the 6-Day War, and not to mention Israel's quiet offer to return everything for peace. And the Arab League gets together in Khartoum with the 3 no's: no negotiations, no recognition of Israel, no peace. You have to tell that story. And by the way, I don't mind if the president along the way also blames Israel for things that he believes that Israel has done wrong. You can criticize Israel, and Israel doesn't always make the right decisions, and it's okay for that criticism to be there, but to not mention the truth of the story along the way. And how about this one? And this one for me, by the way, is the one that hit home the hardest. He talked about the start of the Second Intifada. And we know, we have all the evidence, I write it in the article, that Yasser Arafat was planning the Second Intifada the moment the Camp David talks broke down in 2000, when Israel did not offer the Palestinians everything they wanted, only about 96%. He planned the Second Intifada. And I quote in the article sources from the Palestinian side, which say that. But Obama plays into the narrative that it was Ariel Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount which led to the Second Intifada. But you know how he paints it? He says that Ariel Sharon visited the Temple Mount, which is the 3rd holiest site in Islam, and not one word about it being the holiest site in Judaism. If I'm a reader who doesn't know anything about Israel, and I hear that this Israeli leader visited the 3rd holiest site in Islam with no reference to it being the holiest site in Judaism, I could easily buy into the story that he did something wrong. Why is this Israeli leader, Jewish leader, going to the 3rd holiest site in Islam and inciting the Islamic side in Israel? And he omitted the most important statement, an issue that's on the table today, as we talk about the Temple Mount and its role in Judaism and the state of Israel, and no mention of it being the holiest site for Jews. And one last falsehood, and there are many more in my article. The other one is about Gaza, because that's also very relevant today, as we deal with a continuous cycle of conflict in Gaza. And it always starts with Gaza's side shooting rockets into Israel. And then Barack Obama writes, and Israel responds by leveling cities in Gaza. Leveling cities in Gaza? Is that what we do? Do we not know that our pilots call off their missions time after time because they see too many innocent civilians in the area, because Hamas uses human shields and their mosques and their hospitals to shoot their rockets from, and we do everything we can to avoid those civilian casualties? Leveling cities in Gaza, it's literally playing into the BDS playbook, the full outright anti-Israel playbook. And it's something which we can't be quiet about. And I've been so thrilled to see that even some people on the Democratic side have asked for answers. There's one prominent rabbi in Toronto who actually tagged Daniel Shapiro and he said, give us answers. How does this happen? This person who we support is writing these things about Israel.
So, Dov, first, we want to thank you. We want to thank you for having the understanding that a response was absolutely necessary, and for the depth of knowledge and the pushback that you provided in the article. It wasn't just any article. It wasn't just any writing. There's lots of substantive facts that you provided to all of us. So in addition to what you've done, and in addition to what you've recommended right now, what else do you see is, if you could direct the response to the Obama book and the fact that it's out there now? It is a part of the story, part of the narrative, and that's the danger. What do you see is the response, or the multifaceted response?
I actually want to use the critique of that chapter to use as almost like a curriculum everywhere possible, so that we're continuing to talk about it. Because my concern is that millions upon millions of people are going to sit down and read this book. And when they get to page 689, after reading about everything else, and I'm not weighing in on anything else. It's not my business. I live in Israel. I focus on Israel. Those are all internal American issues. But when they get to page 689, they're going to read a history of Israel, which can only be described as a revisionist history of it. It's just not factual on so many levels. We need to keep that reality out there. And talking about the fact that this memoir is filled with those falsehoods. So I have many, many ideas in terms of turning it into a more sophisticated curriculum, turning it into a video that can be used as well to literally show the sentences that were written and to show why they're false. Because then all of a sudden, we can actually use the president's memoir as our playbook for fighting against BDS and fighting against the anti-Israel movements that are out there. And at the same time, we're really killing two birds with one stone. We're educating on the one hand, and we're making sure that we keep to the fore the fact that the history that was taught in this book is outright false and misleading on so many levels. So we have to figure out the strategy to do that. And now that I see that it's taken hold as it has, and by the way, I hope that it'll go even further. I don't think we're done yet in terms of how it spreads. There's a part of me that hopes that somehow, some way, we can elicit some kind of a response, whether from the former president himself, or from someone on his team. And I hope that the pressure keeps up and makes that happen. But we can't let this just go away, because we have to remember, if we do, we're allowing that narrative, as you said, Sarah, to continue, and to continue to be spreading these falsehoods about Israel to many more people than would ever have heard about it before.
There is one thing that you said before and there are tons of questions. We have well over 20, 30, 40 questions that have come through on the list here. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. Obviously, we are going to close up. But one thing that you had said is that you speak not only on campuses, but you also have spoken to other parliamentarians. And I assume that means in Europe as well. So I just want to get to one final question on that. Mindy Stein in New Jersey asked, do you believe that the Abraham Accords can affect the Europeans' thought processes? Is there a way that can ever change? Because if we're worried about, we certainly can't get the Europeans to say that the Temple Mount had anything to do with the Jews or has any import in that respect. Why should we expect Obama to do it? But I go back to the same that original question. Do you think that the Abraham Accords can affect the European thought processes?
I'll say two things. First of all, yes, I've been in meetings with members of parliament from Europe, throughout Europe. The first thing I'm going to say is Europe is hard. Wow, it is hard. Those meetings are difficult. Presenting the facts and getting the proper reactions are difficult. And there's a lot of work that has to be done there. Having said that, I've also had remarkable communications since the Abraham Accords. They're in shock. They're in shock. These are people who are 100% convinced that there is nothing to talk about with the Arab world as long as we don't resolve the Palestinian conflict. And now all of a sudden that's been turned on its head. And I do believe that it's leading to some level of rethinking, not throughout the parliaments, but certainly in certain sections of them, in certain specific countries, where they're realizing that maybe we weren't on the right path. It takes a lot for someone to be able to say, we were wrong, let's reassess. But there's definitely soul searching that's taking place, and it is having a major, major impact. Hopefully over the years, we'll see that play out in terms of policy. But at the moment, it's stirring, and that's something which we've absolutely seen.
Well, I want to thank you, Dov, for joining us, for taking that much time out of your evening here in Israel. Sarah, thank you for moderating. Thank everyone for joining us on this call. Anyone who wants to get in touch with Rabbi Dov Lipman, former MK for Yesh Atid, and phenomenal speaker and phenomenal book reviewer that we now know, and at least in terms of getting the facts about Israel out there and creating a stir, and hopefully we'll do much more, please feel free to get in touch with me directly, and I will be more than happy to connect you to Dov.